Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Few Connect Live for your Thursday. Coming to you live on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, and of course on our Zoom call with all our beautiful people and beautiful faces I get to see every single week. In news coming next week, we'll also be coming to you live on LinkedIn Live, which is super exciting for digital content nerds like me, because not everyone is allowed to go live on LinkedIn, but Few has been approved, and we will be coming to you live on LinkedIn from next week. So if you can't watch on YouTube or on Facebook or join the Zoom call, you can always watch us on LinkedIn. So how awesome is that? If you are on the Zoom call today, microphones are muted by default, cameras are turned off, but please feel free to turn your cameras on. For those joining us on Facebook or on YouTube, there's a chat facility within both those platforms. Please feel free to use it. Alex Tulio, it is 2 minutes past 12, our official kickoff time. If you connect live for your Thursday, today's going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to it.
Look, they're always good ones, but I am biased, clearly. But yes, the amazing Julie Coates is going to be amazing. No pressure at all, Julie. I can see you smiling in the background there. So as we always say, welcome, welcome. And I do always reiterate some of what Cam says, is that this is all about connection. We have been going now for over 3 months, and it is just beautiful to see this community. It's great to see things changing as well. So as Cam said, we get more people tuning in via YouTube, Facebook, and the LinkedIn Live news is super exciting as well. So we will keep evolving, and great to see you all there. Of course, as I always say, please do put your videos on. This is part of connecting with each other and forging relationships and making connections. Many of you say to us that one of the things that you find most challenging is to increase your network. This is just a perfect way to do it. So I always say, connect with someone on LinkedIn on this call that you don't know. It's a perfect icebreaker, and I know Judith is something you always talk about as well. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Tulio. I'm the CEO of Financial Executive Women, otherwise known as Few, and welcome to Few Connect, our live stream. We are all about the positive progression of women in financial services, about meritocracy, about deepening networks and relationships, and providing these amazing support structures. And you'll see that if you're new to us, we're a very passionate bunch. So we love to have you here. And of course, to our members and regulars, I love seeing your faces as always. So please do share. Yes, I say this every day, and it is for good reason. This is an amazing thing that we're putting on. I know, again, we're biased, but we will keep showing up, and this is free for all employees of our corporate partners. So please do share this. We have some amazing speakers, some wisdom, opportunities to ask questions of our speakers that you just don't get normally. So make use of the chat, and I know you're not shy, so don't make an exception for today. Please do ask Julie questions as well in the chat. And of course, thank you to our corporate partners. We just wouldn't be here without you, and you're a massive part of our community. So thank you. Unsurprisingly, we've got heaps coming up. Heaps. And I know heaps. And I know Judith and Cam, we've been saying this, I think, every week. We've gone, is it Thursday again already?
Yes.
Now it's July, and is it Thursday again already? The weeks do go past very fast, but we will keep bringing you amazing content and speakers. So today we've got Julie Coates, who I'll introduce formally in a moment. Next Tuesday, we have an incredible guest, Leila Smith, and I can thank Julie very much for that introduction. So Julie, we can probably have a bit of a chat about Leila when you're on. But so Leila Smith is the Deputy CEO of the Aurora Education Foundation, and it's amazing the work they do around Indigenous leadership and women and scholarships, and it's going to be such a fantastic conversation. And she has a Kelpie, so clearly she and I have bonded over the dogs barking through the promo, so you know there's always that as well. But Leila is amazing. And then Sarah Davis next Wednesday. This is just another incredible woman from another different angle. So Sarah is she is the first woman to ever lead an expedition down the Nile, amongst other things, and she talks about how she was overcome by fear, self-doubt, and did it anyway. I don't know, does anyone else resonate with this? We seem to talk about this a lot. So I love that we're bringing these incredible women from all different industries and walks of life with some amazing stories to tell. And of course, we have our masterclasses on Fridays as well. And this Friday, you've heard from, if you've been on the live stream this week already, you've heard from Cam Shepherd a couple of times. So our commitment to you is to keep bringing you masterclasses that are really valuable. They're 60 to 90 minutes and they're very, very practical. These are free for our members. So members, please remember this is part of the membership that you already have. So all you need to do is, I'm sure Cam's put a link in the chat, click on that or go to our website. So these are part of your membership. So do make use of them. And as I always say, if there's something, a topic, something you'd really like to delve deep into, let us know, or an expert that you'd like to hear from. We're always looking for some amazing people in our community. So make sure you take note of that 12 o'clock tomorrow. And of course, if you're not a member, why not? But if you're not a member yet, don't take my word for it, how fantastic this community is. We want you to experience it for yourself. So myself and Judith do monthly group mentoring circles. These events are amazing. And unsurprisingly, during lockdown, we've had more interest and more women joining us than ever. They are confidential peer groups. We establish networks. We problem solve. It's, as Judith would say, that fresh eye objective advice as well. So please come to one of those on us. We've got one coming up soon. And of course, one of my masterclasses, we'd love you to experience it as our gift to you as well. And Cam, thanks for putting that in the chat as well. So without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Julie, who of course will be known to many of you, but if you don't yet know Julie, let me introduce her to you. So Julie is a member of PwC's consulting leadership team, and she's responsible for clients and markets, and she's also the financial services lead. She has over 28 years experience in delivering advisory services to many of Australia's largest ASX-listed companies, and is the lead relationship partner for one of the firm's priority financial services clients. Between 2010 and 2014, Julie led the UK firm's financial services risk and regulation practice and specialised in delivering risk and regulatory services and advice to clients in the banking and investment management industries. She has contributed to numerous thought leadership pieces across financial services and banking, and is regularly quoted in the media on a variety of topics, including the major banks' results analysis and impacts of regulatory changes to the industry. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree from John Moores University in Liverpool, England, and is a Fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants Australia and England. She's a non-executive director for the Aurora Foundation Fund, a member of the Professional Services Task Force Committee for Sydney, and of course, a very, very valued member of Financial Executive Women. She's married with 2 children. That's enough of reading from a page, Julie. So good to have you.
Thanks, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here. And I wish you could have also said that I'm leading an expedition down the Nile, but no, I'm not.
We'll uncover something else that we can talk about with you. Absolutely. But I know that's pretty next level, isn't it?
That's amazing. Like, I mean, I love just listening to the talented women, and all the amazing things that they're doing, and the opportunity to listen and learn from them and how they've gone on their, careers and adventures and journeys. Like, fantastic.
It's so good to hear, isn't it? And I do want to just have, before we get into your story, but you are so passionate about, obviously you're non-executive director for the Aurora Foundation, and you introduced me to Leila, who's on next week, who's an incredible woman. So I know you're super passionate about the work they do as well.
Yeah. Oh, look, I am so proud of Aurora Education Foundation and everything they do for Indigenous students, and they have got a huge talent in Leila. Leila's the deputy CEO there, and she is one of their past scholars. So she's somebody who went and studied overseas, has come back to Australia, and is a very impressive and talented young lady. And I think, look, it's going to be a fabulous session next week. She can talk more about how we are helping, children really in the Indigenous communities to aspire towards more, and how do we give them great role models to look up to who have excelled within their area of specialization. And Leila's just a great example of that. And I think just very topical at the moment with them, the Black Lives Matter campaign, and Leila obviously very passionate on that topic and some of the things that Aurora are doing as an organization that are linked to that. So look, I think that will be a great session next week.
It will be great. So thank you for that. So, and it's a great session today already with you. Can you give us a bit of I always like to hear in your, in your own words, what's the Julie Coates story? I mean, I know we got a bit of the bio, but wow, that's a big global career. So give us a bit more of a sense of you.
Of me, yeah. Thanks, Alex. And so, look, I think probably when I look back at 30 years ago, I think my bio must be 2 years old because it said 28 years. I've been at PwC for 30 years now. And like, wow, if you'd have said to me 30 years ago, you'll still be at PwC, I certainly wouldn't have believed you. But I think my career journey has been very much about change, trying new things. And that has meant while staying with one organization, what I have done with that organization is move countries, move cities, move lines of service, moved industries, and just been given different challenges. And it's something that I've just become more and more passionate about. And I feel like every time I go overseas or try a new role or work in a different division, you just learn so much. And so I'm just constantly, I guess, encouraging, all the other fabulous women in particular within our organization to do the same thing, take the opportunity. And so, I grew up in England, and as many of you would know, it's pretty cold and miserable living in England. And I lived in a place called Manchester, which is probably the place where it rains the most in England. So I was on a mission to be working somewhere that provided me with a lot of global opportunities. So I decided to apply to Coopers and Lybrand, as it was back then, became a chartered accountant as quickly as I could, and then basically put in my overseas application form. And they gave me 3 options at the time. It was either Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, or Barbados was my first 3 options. So I said they all sound fabulous, any of those. So I went and spent 2 years in Bermuda, which is where I sort of got stuck into learning about the insurance industry, funds management, and banking. And so I learned my financial services skills over there. And then I thought, okay, where next? Because Bermuda's a fabulous country to live, but 2 years was probably enough because it's pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
And then I took a year off, traveled around the world, came to Sydney, fell in love with Sydney, and decided that this is where I wanted to make my home. So joined the Coopers and Lybrand office as it was then in Sydney. And then interestingly, back in 2010, you mentioned that I went back to the UK. My husband, who's Australian, had never worked overseas and desperately wanted to go and work overseas. So we created the opportunity for him and for me to transfer our roles over to the UK for 4 years, which again was a great experience. So even though I'd grown up in Manchester, I'd never lived in London. So I got the opportunity to go and work in London, and actually been able to travel around Europe 20 years later, rather than as a student and as a backpacker, was a whole different experience. And look, and fabulous for the kids. My kids were 6 and 8, 2 boys, when we went to England, and that was a great experience for them. But Sydney is absolutely where I call home. So 4 years later, we came back here, and then within PwC, I just keep taking on different roles, basically, which I think is why 30 years later, I'm still here and still enjoying it.
It's so great to hear, and it's brilliant to hear your story and your experience, because I know we speak a lot about, in this community about, taking the next step and why culture matters and pushing yourself and jumping into, the unknown. And you're talking about any and all of those things. In terms of, your different roles and locations within PwC, and God, I remember Coopers and Lybrand as well. It feels like that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But so, what do you think, what in essence it has led you to have the confidence? I mean, obviously now you've got a lot of wisdom and experience, but earlier on in your career, what led you to just jumping into the next opportunity? Was it something that was natural to you, or did you have great mentors and people that kind of pushed you gently along the path? Like how did that come about?
Look, and it's exactly the right question, because I think at the time you don't necessarily think enough about what you want your future career to look like and how to create opportunities. And I think we get better, or I certainly feel like I've got better at it over time. And one of the things I've definitely got better at is actually having that conversation with people more senior than me, tapping into sponsors, tapping into mentors, asking for advice, but also asking them to help create those opportunities. So one of the things that really struck me along the way was often I would sit there and want to do something else, but would have that usual challenge around, well, am I really ready for it? Am I going to be good at it? I don't tick all 10 boxes. I only tick 9, so maybe I'm not ready. But actually vocalizing that and making my aspirations clear to the people who had the decision rights made a huge difference. And I often found that it sort of surprised me that people didn't necessarily realize that's what I wanted to do. But unless you actually said it, they didn't realize. And then my experience has been that people are generally, particularly more senior people and particularly more senior men, I found actually were very willing and able to help me, but just didn't know until I told them what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. And I found that to be a little bit of probably a tipping point for me. And the more vocal I then became about what I wanted to do and where I needed their help, the more the opportunities flowed. And so even things like, saying in 2010, I want to go and work overseas. Had I not said that, nobody would have even told me there was an opportunity to go and do that. So sometimes I think just being clear about what you want to do, not in a demanding way or in a high maintenance, difficult way, but in a career aspiration way. I'd love to have this sort of experience. So if you think there's that sort of opportunity, please talk to me about it. So I definitely encourage others to articulate more where they really want to go, what they want to do, because then everyone's in a better place to help them.
It's such great advice. And it's one of those things we often talk about here about, they're the obvious things, but that doesn't mean they happen. And I completely agree, because we almost don't want to put ourselves forward because it feels a bit pushy and all this stuff that goes on in our head.
Yeah.
But your leaders aren't mind readers. Like this
No.
is the thing. So I've always found that with career progression and opportunities, it is absolutely a two-way street, isn't it? It's, yes, as a leader, you need to be tapped into what your people are, what are the signs, and having conversations, but also team members need to be proactive in those conversations as well. It was interesting. We actually had David Bribus on yesterday, who's the CEO for BNP Paribas Asset Management. And he was saying something very similar about communication, conversations, exploring opportunities.
Yeah.
I know, because we've obviously chatted a few times. I know you're really passionate about women putting their hand up for global opportunities as well. I mean, slightly different at the moment, probably not as.
Yeah.
But as a rule, I mean, do you find that do women hang back a bit from wanting to jump onto a global opportunity, or what do you see there?
Yes, and as Judith would know, we've talked about this over the years at different few conferences, because this is something that we've studied a bit more at PwC to understand, well, what gets in the way of women being more successful. And one of the things that we found was that lack of global experience, or lack of different types of roles and different perspectives that are learned through having that global experience, was one of the things that was potentially holding some of the women back. And when we then dug into, well, why aren't women taking more global opportunities, there were lots of myths that surrounded that topic, which some of them were on the employer side and some of them on the employee side. Excuse me. And so what we found was there was definitely an inherent assumption within an organization, within a typical organization from an employer, that women didn't want to go overseas, that women weren't going to be in a position to go overseas because they had children or because they had a husband, who had a career. And so there were some definite assumptions there. So therefore, the global opportunities didn't necessarily get put in front of the women. And then from the candidate's perspective, what was often happening is they hadn't really even thought about it because they had no role models to see that had gone overseas. No one had talked to them about the benefit of going overseas and bringing some of that experience back. And so there was just this disconnect between the opportunities that were available to create, a better leader, and women either putting themselves forwards or being encouraged to be put forward for those roles. Yeah. And so a lot of the things that we've tried to do, and shared a lot of thinking about this and talked to lots of organizations as well as within PwC, was how do we start to break some of those myths, and how do we put proactive opportunities in place to encourage women to apply for those roles, to create those roles, and also to change this mindset that she won't want to go because she's got children, or she won't want to go because her husband's got a job here. And often just even having that conversation with some of our really talented female staff and partners, actually opened up a whole world of opportunity. And I think, then it just creates this broader capability within women to be able to then come back and take an even more senior role. So that's some of the thinking we've been putting into it. And, I just hugely encourage people to think about what's their next cycle of experience, and then what's the next cycle after that. And I just think overseas being part of your journey, parking COVID-19 for a minute, I think is just a huge asset to anybody's, experience that they gain over their career. And I just know I've learned so much every time you take yourself out of your comfort zone. And whether it's Bermuda or whether it was London or whether it's, different industry, different line of service, you just learn so much.
There's so much wisdom there. And I think this is such an important conversation. And one of the things, I mean, you've just mentioned many, but what you're talking about there also, Julie, about not seeing what myths and assumptions on both sides of the table is what we're talking here.
Yeah.
But the lack of role models, if you haven't seen someone who you identify with it walk that path or do that before, then it does feel, a bit, opaque and hard, and I'm not really sure. So I think it's one of the things I love about this and about FEW is that it's all about having these conversations to talk about these things and to have role models. I should also say to all of you listening, take this opportunity to ask Julie some questions as well. You've got an amazing resource here right now. So please, you're not normally shy in the chat. So if anything's resonating, if you want to explore something more, if you've got a question, please, as always, do put it in the chat. We'd love to see that as well. So Julie, switching gears a bit, God, I feel like, as always, we could talk for an hour, but limited time. But so I'd love to talk a bit more now about the work that PwC is doing and yourself around this concept of rebooting Australia. And I know that it's a big piece of work and thought leadership around, where to from here, from given a global pandemic, like what does that mean from an economy perspective, from a whole range of different things. Can you give us a bit of a feel for the work that you're doing around this concept of rebooting Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. And we will send a link out to everybody afterwards for those who are interested in reading a bit more of the research and the report that we've put out there. And there's two things that we've been looking at. As we've all been in the middle of COVID-19, there's obviously been a lot of tactical responses and short-term measures that have been put in place. But what we also wanted to do was sort of pause for a minute, stand back and say, well, what are the more medium and long-term strategies that need to be adopted? And that's for every organisation within Australia, but it's also for the country. And how do we, and we work, we do a lot of work with the government as well. So a lot of this was based on some either economic modelling, but also lots of conversations with our clients and lots of conversations with the government to say, like, how do we actually reboot the country? And then another kind of related piece of thought leadership we've been doing is called Fit for Recovery. So it's kind of taking how do we reboot the economy, but then also how do we help every single organisation recover and actually, thrive through this? And how do you learn some of the lessons or take some of the benefits of what we've just experienced? And all of you would have experienced, different bits of this to different degrees. How do we take all those and come out of this fitter and stronger? And so in the Project Reboot report, we put this into three main areas. It was around people, around the economy, and around social contracts. So areas like, consumer behaviors now have changed, and they will, and so the question is, how much are they going to have changed? Will they reset? Or how do we bank some of those changes and use them as a force for good? Productivity, flexibility, distributed working. I mean, how amazing has it been how quickly we've all adapted to that? And there's lots to love about that. We're feeling like we can work more flexibly. It's a more inclusive way of working. But as we, shift back to moving back to the office, how are we going to keep some of those benefits, etc.? And so some of the things we talked about in the Project Reboot is we need the government as well as all organisations to be thinking about these different levers and the things that have changed and how we actually make sure that we set Australia up to be successful. So the third area within people is around migration. So, obviously huge impact right now on migration, and what is that going to look like going forwards, and how do we adapt to the changes that we're going to see that come out of the back of this. Within the economy section, a lot in there around accelerated digitization. I mean, look at us all now, online Zoom calls, online Zoom gym classes, the biggest acceleration to the digital journey we all needed to go on has been COVID-19. And I think one thing that's really struck everybody is it's not actually been as difficult as everybody thought for us to work in a more digital way. And a lot of things can be done remotely. But then what becomes really important as well is things like cyber, things like privacy, things like data, and how do we, use all of that as a force for good. Resilient supply chains, supply chains have had to change fundamentally, and how we've had to think differently about that because we're operating in a completely different environment. And then we're starting to see a lot of industry consolidation. How are we going to see that playing out into the future? And then finally, within the social contracts area, we talk a lot about greater government involvement. So we've just had the government actually get hugely involved. We've seen stimulus packages, we've seen JobKeeper. What is that going to look like going forward? And there are variations of that around the world that we're experiencing. And again, some of that is good, maybe some of that not so good. What are we going to do about tax? We actually ran a session yesterday with Anna Bly and with Martin Fay from the ABA and from ASFA. And Martin was talking about this being the perfect opportunity for us to actually fix the tax system. Now, I mean, it is a huge opportunity, but I think, facing into that is complex. But I think, now would be a great time for the government to have a good think about that. And then finally, obviously, debt and capital, how are those sort of levers going to change? So look, there's a lot in there. I'd love you all to get an opportunity to have a look at it and see what you think. And obviously, we're very happy to talk to any more of it. And we're talking to lots of our clients at the moment about it. And then and a couple of probably key things that I'd say our clients are just super interested in at the moment is that how do we build in the productivity gains that we've just experienced? How do we not lose those? We're making faster decisions. We've got clear accountability. How do we not lose all of that? And then the digitization of the workforce and working flexibly. They're probably the two things that we're having most conversations around at the moment with all of our clients. And then we're doing the same thing at PwC. How do we bank the benefits of all of those?
And I think it's so interesting that when we're talking about how to bank the benefits, because, I mean, obviously you're not the first, leader on here who's saying, we've had some CEOs that have been on here saying, one of my biggest fears is that, we get through this and we lose some of the benefits. Like, there's obviously been lots of hard times, but there has been benefits, increased innovation, dispersed workforces. How do we not go back to the old groove because it's kind of the comfort zone and that's what we were doing? What are you finding from a PwC perspective of you for your own internal, thinking and stuff? What are you seeing is happening at the moment?
So, and this has been super interesting. I'm sure, each of you are having sort of slightly different experiences. So what we did a couple of weeks ago was we surveyed all of our staff and said to them, how do you want to work in the future? Are we going to open up all the offices and everybody comes back in? What are you worried about and how do you want it to work? And the response we got from most of our people was they wanted to be able to come in, but they didn't want to come in the whole time. They wanted to continue the flexibility, but they definitely wanted to be able to access the office. Mm-hmm. And what has happened is we've opened up our offices now, but we've got probably 15% of the workforce coming in. Everybody comes in on either a Tuesday, Wednesday, or a Thursday. Nobody comes in on a Monday or a Friday. And people are often just coming in for a couple of hours. Yeah. And then I also think that as people are coming in, the experience is probably not as great as they thought it was going to be, because of course everyone else isn't here, and you end up coming into the office, getting on a Zoom call, and sort of figure, well, I might as well have done that at home. So
people are craving this interaction. It's this balance of, I know a lot of people have been saying to me, I miss the incidental chat. Yeah. So. And you actually don't realize until that isn't there how much you can gain for grabbing you for 30 seconds in the tea room or something and saying, hey, I had an idea. Like, that seems to be what people are craving around, going back to the office. But I think, as you say, it's our habits are changing. Well, I'm interested as well. I mean, if you can share, because obviously a lot of your clients from a PwC perspective are financial services, which is very much this community. What are some of the trends you're seeing, if you can share, just around the thinking from some of your clients? I mean, I know you've highlighted the way we come back to work and productivity and those sort of things, but what about more broadly around the economy? Are you seeing, are there any things that you're seeing?
Yeah. I think our clients nervous and worrying about how quickly the road to recovery, how quickly it will be on the road to recovery, what is going to happen in September when JobKeeper comes off, and a lot of the government stimulus is, what is the longer term impact of the fact that we've just let lots of people access their super, what is going to be the longer term impact of the fact that that we've just delayed everyone's mortgage payments, but we haven't, it's not like we've stopped them, we're actually just sort of delaying the opportunity. And then starting to see, a lot of smaller businesses really struggle to be able to, make it through. So our clients are, I'd say, really concerned about how they manage through not just the rest of this year, but then how long is this going to go for? I mean, it varies a bit by different industry sector. But having to face into reduced workforces, having to face into redundancy programs, and obviously we've seen a lot of those kind of hit the press. We're having to face into our own redundancy program here at PwC. So I think our clients are doing a mix of trying to work out where the productivity benefits have come from and how to keep them, how to really change the employee value proposition now to embrace some of those changes, working more digitally, working more flexibly, but also, given that we can do things in a more productive way, probably needing less of a workforce, a lot of thought going into what's the physical space that we now need for the future, which is going to be huge for the real estate sector as well, if we think about how that plays out. So and then I think a lot of nervousness around what is going to happen when we get to the end of September and what some of the decisions that the government is going to make, and I can see a couple of questions coming through the chat around like the tax question that I mentioned. I think there's a lot of interest in how do we actually make sure that we're focusing on some of the big changes that need to be made. So the tax system is just one of those changes that actually this could be an opportunity to create a fairer and more equitable system, and something that has been evolved over time, which doesn't necessarily really make sense, doesn't focus on the right different sections of the community and different sort of regressive taxes that are in place. Now is probably an opportunity to actually relook at some of that. That Martin Fay from ASFA yesterday, and I can still see Nicole Oborn's on the call, who's one of our superannuation experts. Hey, Nicole. The whole superannuation industry, I mean, it's a huge part of our economy, and how do we again, make sure that that system is working for all Australians, and Australians are making, the right choices around that system. And I think, that is just a huge part of how we can make sure that Australia has got a stable economy going forwards as well. Yeah. And so, getting that balance right, I think, between government interventions and letting some of the market forces play out, I think it's just going to be super important.
I mean, as you said, I mean, all of this is incredibly complex, isn't it? I mean, there's no one answer, because there's the ripple effect. I mean, I'm really interested as well. I mean, do you think, I know reading some of your PwC's work about, this concept of, Fortress Australia. Do you want to?
That's right.
Yeah, because I think it feels like it's a real crossroads moment on so many levels. But
yeah,
talk to us a bit about this concept of Fortress Australia.
Yeah, look, and that's and this is something we talked about yesterday again with Anna Bly and Martin Fay on the call. Fortress Australia, and is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? And is it really even our choice? Mm-hmm. So one of the things I think super fascinating is, when you look at the direction that's happening around the world and some of the social unrest that's happening, the feeling of inequity around the world, as I mentioned before, the Black Lives Matter campaign, the fact that we've got a presidential election coming up in the US, all the changes we've seen in the UK, and the different way that different countries have responded to this pandemic. And the way that we are now facing into or retreating, back inside our borders, the global direction of travel is one much more of, creating fortress, whatever each of the countries are. So do we now create the opportunity to be our own standalone? Do we start to supply more of our own goods? Do we change our import-export profiles? They're huge decisions to make, and they have lots of consequences. And who do we want to be closely allied to? Everybody knows, a lot of the challenges we have in that working relationship we have with China, but it's such an important relationship. And then the tension that's created with our relationships then with the US. They're just super important questions. So that Fortress Australia piece, I think, is that balance of how do we become self-sufficient? How do we, make sure that we're doing the right things to stimulate our own economy, but still benefiting from having those global alliances, particularly in areas where, we're not really sustainable in certain areas without some of those important global relationships. And so there's a danger, I think, in us becoming Fortress Australia, but we also need to be just making sure we're stimulating the economy in the right way.
Yeah, like you said, God, they're all such big questions, aren't they? And they've got these knock-on impacts in so many ways. I'd be really interested to see how this impacts our manufacturing,
Yeah.
All those sort of big kind of obvious questions that you're just outlining. So there's so much in that. And thanks, Nicole, for sharing the link earlier. So for all of you who are interested to getting in even deeper in that, I really encourage you having a look at that. Also, Sheena, it's a really good point that you make. You've said, along with the tax system, I'd love to hear if a government review of social services might be on the cards. I'm concerned that the digitisation can also leave some groups behind, for example, the elderly, the poor, and more rural participants. What am I trying to say?
Yeah. Look, and a lot of hardship cases, like a huge amount of hardship cases out of there. And Anna Bly, I was talking about from the ABA, she talked a lot about this yesterday. So look, I don't know the answer to your question as to whether there will be, but what I do know is it's very front of mind. The government certainly is very aware, as are all the banks in particular. And then the ABA, Anna was talking about this a lot, right? So some of the changes that have come into place in the banking industry, for example, open banking kicked off as of yesterday. The new payments platform is up and running. So there are different ways now that customers are going to be able to have a stronger voice, within the system about how they want to operate. But to your point, that isn't necessarily equally available to all demographics of society, and exacerbated by the challenges we've got through COVID-19 for some of those, particularly rural communities. And so I think that balance between, not accelerating too fast so that we leave whole cohorts of people behind or disadvantage whole cohorts of society, is absolutely something that needs to be front of mind. And looking, it will be for the government. They've also got to think, very much about public unrest and about equity. And so how, and we've seen the way that's played out terribly overseas. So how do we not create that kind of scenario here? So look, I'd love to think that the government will do something more proactively around some of those social issues. They're definitely very front of mind, but they're not necessarily that easy to fix. But I know within the banking industry in particular, that is definitely something that's very front of mind as well, and particularly around hardship cases. And we're going to see a lot more of them. Like come September, as I said before, we're going to see a lot more.
And you touched on it very briefly before. There's so much to this, but even you look at what's happening with superannuation, like such a massive part on so many levels of the economy and everything else. But, again, we're seeing, great, you can take the $10,000 out if you need it, but then the knock-on impact and the gap for women and super. And there's just so much to talk about, really big issues. Natasha, thanks for putting a question in the chat. Did you want to ask yourself, or will I? You're just on mute though, so if you want to ask, unmute away.
You can ask the question, Alex. Thank you.
Oh, okay, no problem. So, and you can probably see as well, Julie. So Natasha's saying, what untapped opportunities? It's a new financial year. I know, how did that creep up on us? But so it's a new financial year. What untapped opportunities do you see where women should focus, research, or invest in?
Oh, that's a good question. So I guess what's going through my mind is some of the benefits or some of the changes that we've seen in is sort of coming back to what is the workforce of the future, how does it need to adapt, and what does it need to look like to flourish? So what I think is happening is inside lots of organizations at the moment are fairly large exercises around workforce planning. And so where I think, women in particular should be thinking about, well, what does that workforce planning look like? What are the jobs of the future? What are the skills that we need for the future? And how do I invest in developing those skills? And anything, digital, I think has got to be a good thing to think about. There's going to be a lot more focus around data, around insights, around analytics, those types of skills. But I think as a bare minimum, everybody becoming more digital, which is, part of the journey that we've all started to go on, is going to be super important. And then if we think about the industries that are going to flourish in the new environment, I think that, that's part of where the focus probably needs to go as well. So if you're thinking about, well, what can my career look like? It's what skills am I going to invest in? How am I going to be able to operate more digitally and in a more agile way, different sort of working environments? And I would definitely be encouraging, women in particular to be thinking about applying whatever their kind of core skill is, just becoming more digital at it. Yeah. So these productivity benefits I've talked about, it's like reimagining what you do. So what we're doing with our teams at the moment is we've put out what we call a digital fitness app, which is, it's a free app that anyone can access. And it's like playing a game. You go in and you score yourself on your digital competency, and then it feeds you online learning and training, and then you do the test again. So you improve your digital fitness, your digital knowledge. We then run academies where you can actually spend a couple of days learning some new tools like Alteryx, Power BI. And then we have kind of digital, sort of accelerators and different kind of programs that we put in place. I think whatever your version of that is, or however you can upskill yourself, because what we get our people to do is we say, okay, now that you've learned some of these new skills, go back and reimagine what your job could be. How can you improve it, make it more efficient, change the processes? And I think all of us doing more of that is how we're going to create future opportunities for ourselves. Oh, look at Nicole. I love Nicole. Nicole's already put the digital fitness app on there for you all to see. So go in and have a play around. Like, it's brilliant. And, and whatever your version of that is, I think the future for all of us is doing what we do in a more digital way.
That's great and very generous to share that as well. Thanks, Nicole. You're all over it. So yes, I think this is such an interesting conversation because, we do hear a lot about reimagining skills and what the workforce looks like, and not just the shape of where we work from or how we work, but exactly what you're talking about. And I know for this community, a lot of you are saying to us that this is almost this forced reflection point, like it's made you think about what you want to do. What do I want to do when I grow up? What's next? I know Judith and I talk to a lot of our members about, is now the time to be considering new opportunities and speaking to people? And we say a resounding yes, because absolutely, granted, there are redundancies and all those sorts of things happening, but now is the time to absolutely be reaching out, building your networks, building your skills. Like, don't wait, is what I would say. What do you say to that, Julie?
Oh, look, 100%. And probably two things I'd say. One is the job you're doing at the moment, don't wait for somebody to tell you to reimagine it and do it differently and do it in a more digital way. Just do that. I think, that's one of the things I think we're all probably feeling a bit more empowered to do that as well. So if you're doing something that's manual or, takes ridiculously long time, or even, you look at what an amazing job few are doing at the moment, completely reimagined. We're doing everything online, and so there's lots of different versions of that. I think just reimagine how we do things. That was the first thing I'd say. Whatever you're doing at the moment, just challenge yourself to do it differently. And then the second thing, to Alex's point, I think building your networks, tapping into your networks, sharing some of your thinking, connecting with people, looking at opportunities. I just don't think we can do enough of that. We all help each other. And I also think, you never know what opportunities are out there until you go and start exploring it. But the more you're proactive around that and the job you're doing at the moment and the job you could be doing in the future, I think it's all upside.
Again, such sage advice. And it comes back to what you were saying before about we've got to put ourselves out there. We've got to have the conversations. We've got to tell people what we want. We've got to think about it. I can't believe 12:45. I told you this would go really fast. In the last minute or so, we haven't even talked about your dogs yet. I love to talk about pooches, life in lockdown with teenage boys, what's the household been like for you as you're juggling everything else?
Yeah, look, it's been an interesting journey. I'm sure it has for all of you. So my eldest boy turns 18 next week, and he's in the middle of doing HSC. So that's been an interesting challenge. My youngest one spends most of the time up at the farm with my husband. We've got a cattle farm out in Oberon, and he dials into his online school Zoom classes on the back of a tractor, which I think the teacher always finds very entertaining. And we've got 2 French bulldogs, Bozo and Roxy. So one of the great things about that is, of course, you have to go and walk them every day. So, that forced opportunity to go and do exercise, I think, is brilliant. So, look, our household is generally a bit chaotic. Lots of smelly teenage boys in and out all the time. But, wouldn't change it for the world. It's all pretty good.
Look, it's awesome. And, it's good to just, we're all experiencing this in different ways. So that's one of the things I love about this, is that you see the backgrounds, the dogs barking, all that sort of stuff. So thank you so much, Julie. It's been an absolute pleasure, and so appreciate your time and your wisdom. And thanks also for you and PwC being such a big part of the FEW community. It's awesome to see you and your people joining in our ecosystem. So thank you very much for today. And thank you, everyone, as always, for spending nearly an hour with us. We never take that for granted, and we so appreciate it. Let us know what you'd like to hear about, who you'd like to hear from. Have a brilliant Thursday. Don't forget the masterclass tomorrow. And of course, Lila Smith on Tuesday will be absolutely fantastic. So thanks all. Have a great afternoon, and I'll see you soon. And thanks again to Julie Coates. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye.